It was a quiet Saturday morning when billionaire Ethan Cole decided to return to his mansion unexpectedly. He had canceled a weekend business trip and wanted to spend the day alone. No one in the house knew he was coming back early, not even the maids. As he strolled into the living room, he tossed his keys on the table and made his way upstairs, loosening his tie. Ethan's thoughts were elsewhere as he climbed the stairs. He had been feeling off lately, tired of boardroom meetings, fake smiles, and gold diggers circling his wealth like vultures. All he craved now was peace. When he reached the top floor, he noticed one of the guest room doors slightly ajar. Curious, he pushed it open, and froze. Inside, his newest maid, Aria, was changing. She was facing away, slipping out of her uniform, unaware that someone was watching. The silky curves of her body were framed by the morning light pouring in through the window. Ethan's eyes widened, and he instinctively turned away, but not before she noticed him. Her eyes locked with his in the mirror, shock, panic, and something else flickered between them. Aria yelped and quickly grabbed the robe lying on the bed, covering herself in a hurry. "Sir! I didn't know you were home," she stammered, her cheeks flushed with a deep shade of red. Ethan stepped back out of the room immediately, running a hand through his hair and apologizing from the hallway. "I wasn't trying to, I didn't expect anyone to be in there." For a moment, silence hung thick in the air. Aria's heart pounded. She had been working for him for just 3 weeks, and now she'd accidentally caught his attention in the most embarrassing way. She wasn't just beautiful, she had a quiet strength in her, a soft resilience that Ethan had noticed even before today. But seeing her like that had shifted something inside him. Ethan walked downstairs and poured himself a drink. His mind kept replaying that brief glimpse, not because of the physical beauty alone, but because of how vulnerable and real she looked. For a man used to people pretending around him, that rawness was disarming. He couldn't stop thinking about her, and he knew something had just begun. Later that afternoon, Aria avoided Ethan like a plague. She kept herself busy cleaning the garden, organizing the storage room, and doing anything that didn't require going near the living room. But fate wasn't done playing tricks. Ethan decided to check on the storeroom renovations himself and found her there, struggling to lift a heavy box. "Let me help you," he offered gently. Aria turned, startled, but nodded slowly. As they worked side by side, their hands brushed a few times. Each touch was electric, causing Aria to fumble and Ethan to glance at her with growing curiosity. Neither of them knew what to say, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was charged. Once the box was placed down, Ethan spoke first. "Aria, about earlier. I hope you know I would never intentionally disrespect you." She gave a small smile, appreciative of his words. "I know, sir." Their eyes met again, this time longer, deeper. The air shifted around them, no longer just boss and maid, but something stirring beneath the surface. The next day, Ethan found himself watching the security feed from the kitchen, not out of suspicion, but out of a need to see her. He watched Aria humming to herself, dancing slightly as she chopped vegetables. There was a lightness to her that contrasted sharply with the cold, polished people he was used to. Ethan realized he wanted to know more. What did she like? Why did she take a job as a maid? Where had she learned to cook so well? And why did her smile make his heart skip a beat? He had never felt this way about anyone, especially not someone under his roof, and definitely not someone society would call beneath him. That night, during dinner, he surprised her by asking her to sit and eat with him. Aria was stunned. "Sir?" she asked, uncertain if it was a joke. "I insist," he said with a warm smile. Nervously, she sat at the edge of the table, while Ethan served wine and asked her questions. By the time dessert arrived, they were laughing like old friends. Ethan's staff began to notice the change. Their boss smiled more. He stayed home longer. He even dressed more casually. And every time Arya entered the room, his eyes followed her like she was the only person there. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gilda, who had worked for Ethan's family for years, saw the signs immediately. She pulled Arya aside one morning. "You be careful," she warned gently. "Men like him, they don't mix with girls like us. Not without consequences." Arya swallowed hard, understanding the older woman's concern. But what could she do? She hadn't asked for his attention, and truthfully, she didn't know what to do with it. Later that night, Ethan found Arya sitting quietly in the garden. He joined her, offering her a blanket against the chill. "Why do you always sit out here?" he asked. "Because it's quiet," she said, "and because I can breathe." Ethan watched her face in the moonlight, realizing just how much peace she brought him. He leaned closer, almost as if drawn by an invisible thread. Just before their lips could meet, Arya pulled back. "I can't," she whispered. Ethan blinked, surprised. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because this feels like a dream. And dreams don't last for people like me." Ethan frowned. He didn't want her to feel small or disposable. "Arya, you're not just a maid in my house. You're something more." That night, Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His life had always been clear: money, control, power. But Arya had shaken that foundation. He wasn't sure what this was between them, but he knew he didn't want it to end. The next morning, he made a decision. If he wanted her, he had to show her she mattered, not with gifts, but with honesty. He invited her to join him on a walk through the nearby orchard. They spoke of childhoods, dreams, and regrets. Arya confessed she had once hoped to be a teacher but had dropped out to take care of her younger siblings. Ethan listened, moved by her strength. "You deserve more," he said softly. "And I want to give you more." The days that followed were filled with a strange tension. Ethan began spending more time at home than in his offices, something his staff and associates found odd. He always found ways to cross paths with Arya, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes in the garden, and sometimes just passing her in the hall with that slow, magnetic gaze. Arya, on her part, tried to stay focused on her work, but every time their eyes met, her heart betrayed her. One afternoon, he walked into the kitchen while she was baking. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla filled the room. "You always smell like sugar," he teased gently. Arya smiled but didn't look at him. "That's because I'm always in here." "No," he said, stepping closer. "I think it's because you're naturally sweet." She looked up then, and that look held 1,000 unspoken things. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But he touched her hand gently, tracing his thumb along her fingers. "I want to take you out," he said. Arya's eyes widened. "In public?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "You deserve to be seen. Not hidden away like some secret." She hesitated, torn between fear and excitement. "All right," she whispered finally. And just like that, something changed forever. Their first outing was a quiet picnic in a secluded meadow behind the estate. Ethan had packed the basket himself, awkwardly, clumsily, but with genuine care. Arya couldn't stop laughing as he tried to spread the blanket, and they both collapsed into fits of laughter when the wind almost blew it away. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like a regular man, not a billionaire with responsibilities. They ate, talked, and eventually lay side by side, watching the clouds drift above them. "Do you ever feel trapped?" Arya asked suddenly. Ethan turned to her. "Every day," he admitted. "But with you, I feel free." The honesty in his voice disarmed her. She turned toward him and placed her hand on his chest. "Then don't lose this," she said softly. "Whatever this is, hold on to it." He nodded, but deep inside, a voice warned him that their peace wouldn't last. Wealth came with eyes, with judgment, and with scandal. But as he looked into Arya's hopeful eyes, he pushed the voice aside. He would protect her, no matter what. Rumors began to swirl in the mansion. The staff exchanged glances and whispers, and soon, word began leaking to outsiders. A billionaire falling for his maid? The idea scandalized the elite circles Ethan moved in. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from concerned friends who wanted to talk some sense into him. Ethan ignored them all. But Arya felt the shift. The way the older butler suddenly became colder. The way Mrs. Gilda looked at her with sad eyes now. Arya couldn't ignore the tension that followed her like a shadow. She confronted Ethan one evening. "They're talking about me. About us. Maybe this was a mistake." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You are not a mistake, and I'm not ashamed of you." He took her hand and placed it over his heart. "This is real for me. I don't care what they say." Arya wanted to believe him. She needed to. But the fear of being torn apart by the world outside their bubble grew stronger with every passing day. One day, Ethan's cousin, Miranda, showed up unannounced. She was polished, poised, and wore judgment like perfume. The moment she spotted Arya serving tea, her perfectly arched brow raised in amusement. "And who's this?" she asked with a cold smile. "My maid," Ethan said flatly. "And my guest." Miranda laughed. "Ethan, don't tell me you're serious about this?" Arya stood frozen, tea tray trembling slightly in her grip. Ethan's jaw clenched. "I am. So show some respect." Miranda didn't reply, but the damage was done. Arya excused herself quickly and rushed to the garden, her eyes brimming with tears. Ethan found her minutes later, pacing near the roses. "I don't belong in your world," she whispered. "They'll never accept me. I'll be your shame." Ethan grabbed her shoulders gently. "Then we'll build our own world," he said. "One where no one tells us who we can or can't love." His voice was steady, but deep down, he knew their fight had only just begun. The next morning, Arya found an envelope on her bed. Inside was a gold card with her name etched in cursive: "Arya, join me for dinner tonight. Dress elegantly." She stared at it, her fingers trembling. It wasn't just a dinner, it was a declaration. Ethan was introducing her, not hiding her. When evening came, she walked into the grand dining room wearing the only formal dress she owned, a simple, navy gown that hugged her curves and swayed like silk. Ethan's breath caught in his throat when he saw her. "You look stunning," he said, rising to pull out her chair. "I feel like a fraud," she replied honestly. "You're realer than anyone I've ever known," he answered. Dinner was candlelit and intimate. Ethan opened up about his childhood, his loneliness, and how he'd built walls no one had ever broken, until her. Arya, in return, shared her dreams, her fears, and how she never imagined someone like him would look at her twice. By dessert, he reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "Let me love you, Arya." Days turned into weeks, and Arya no longer wore her uniform. She still helped around the house, but not as a maid, as someone Ethan cherished. They took long walks, cooked meals together, and sometimes danced to soft music in the living room when no one was watching. Their connection deepened, growing roots that neither of them had expected. But outside their haven, the world watched. Paparazzi caught wind of the story. One photo, Ethan holding Arya's waist as they laughed near his car, spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed of scandal. Socialites whispered behind closed doors. Ethan's board began asking questions about his judgment. Arya saw it all, and it broke her. "I didn't mean to ruin your reputation," she told him one night. "You didn't," Ethan replied. "You made me human again." But Arya wasn't convinced. She began retreating into herself, pulling away slowly, even though her heart bled every time she turned from him. Ethan noticed the shift in Arya. She no longer smiled as freely, and her laughter, once so easy and warm, now came with effort. One night, he walked into her room without knocking, something he hadn't done in weeks. She was sitting by the window, staring into the moonlight. "Talk to me," he said gently. She looked up, eyes shimmering. "I love you," she said softly. "But loving you feels like holding a flame. Beautiful but dangerous. I don't want to be the reason your life burns." Ethan crossed the room and knelt before her. "Arya, my life before you was cold. If this love is fire, then let it burn everything that doesn't matter." She blinked back tears. "But what if I can't handle the heat?" Ethan held her face in his hands. "Then I'll build you shade. I'll carry you through it. I just need you to trust me." And in that moment, something shifted again. Not just in Arya, but in both of them, like a bond that had now been tested and didn't break. The next morning, the estate woke up to chaos. A former flame of Ethan's, Vanessa, had arrived unannounced. She was media royalty, a model-turned-influencer who thrived on attention. "I saw the photos," she purred, walking into the drawing room where Ethan sat with Arya. "I had to come see if the rumors were true." Ethan's expression hardened. "They are. And you're not welcome here, Vanessa." Vanessa chuckled. "Oh, Ethan. Always so serious. You'll get over her. She's just a phase." Arya rose to leave, but Vanessa's words cut deeper. "Don't go," Ethan said firmly. "She needs to hear me say this." He stood up and faced Vanessa. "Arya is not a phase. She is the woman I want to spend my life with. And if you came here thinking you could shake that, you've wasted your time." Vanessa smiled coldly, then turned on her heel and left, but not before whispering to Arya, "You won't survive this world, darling. Just wait." After Vanessa's visit, Ethan doubled security and instructed the staff not to let uninvited guests in again. Arya, though, couldn't shake Vanessa's words. They played on repeat in her mind, "You won't survive this world." The doubt took root. Maybe love wasn't enough. Maybe belonging to his world required more than a beating heart. One evening, she stood in front of the full-length mirror, wearing a sleek emerald dress Ethan had sent to her room. It was beautiful, elegant, daring, but it didn't feel like her. She missed her aprons, her quiet mornings in the kitchen, the simplicity of a life where she didn't have to wonder if she was enough. Ethan found her still standing there. He walked behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, their eyes meeting in the mirror. "You're more than enough," he whispered, as though reading her thoughts. "You don't have to change to fit my world. I'll change mine to make you feel at home." And in that moment, she smiled, not just for him, but for herself. But even love couldn't stop the storm that followed. Someone inside the estate leaked private photos of Arya, intimate moments she had shared with Ethan. The media exploded. Headlines turned cruel, twisting their love into scandal. The shame wasn't Ethan's. It was Arya's. They dragged her name through the mud. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply packed a small bag and left in the middle of the night, leaving behind a note, "I love you. But I can't keep being the target. I need to find who I am outside of you." Ethan was devastated. He searched the entire city for her, but she had disappeared. Weeks passed. The house grew silent again. Ethan stopped attending events. He canceled meetings. All he did was replay memories, her laughter, her scent, her touch. And as silence replaced her footsteps, Ethan realized something. He wasn't just missing her, he was incomplete without her. Arya had taken refuge in a small countryside guest house run by a kind older woman. She worked there, helped in the kitchen, cleaned the rooms, and started rediscovering herself. People here didn't know her as the billionaire's maid. She was just Arya, and for the first time in weeks, she could breathe. She thought of Ethan constantly, how he looked at her like she was the only person in the room, how his touch always made her feel safe. But every time she thought of going back, fear held her in place. She didn't want to return only to face another wave of judgment. She needed to heal first. Then one afternoon, a man in a suit arrived at the guest house. He handed her a small box and said, "He told me to give you this." No questions asked. Inside was a velvet jewelry case. But there was no ring, only a simple chain with a locket. She opened it and gasped. Inside was a tiny photo of them dancing, and a folded note that read, "Come home when you're ready. I'll still be waiting." Back at the mansion, Ethan had transformed his world. He distanced himself from toxic friends, restructured his company to give him more freedom, and even started building a private garden in Arya's favorite spot near the orchard. It was a promise, a place only they would share. His staff noticed the change. He smiled less but worked more. He wasn't just keeping busy, he was building something, a future for when she returned. If she returned. Every day, he hoped. Every evening, he stood by the balcony, eyes scanning the driveway, just in case. One night, he came back from a late meeting and found a candle flickering in the hallway. Confused, he followed it. And then he saw her, Arya, standing by the piano, wearing the emerald dress he'd once given her. "I'm home," she said softly. And just like that, the pieces fell back together. They didn't speak much that night. Words weren't needed. Ethan walked up to her, pulled her into his arms, and held her like she might disappear again. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent she'd missed so much. "I needed time," she whispered. "I understand," he replied. They sat by the fireplace, drinking tea, wrapped in a silence that spoke volumes. "I want to be with you," she said eventually. "But not as your maid. Not hidden. Not pitted. I want to be your equal." Ethan nodded slowly. Then that's what we'll be. From this moment forward. He pulled out a small key from his pocket and handed it to her. This is to your room upstairs. But only until you're ready to move into mine. As my partner. My love. And someday, my wife. Arya smiled, tears slipping down her cheek. She took the key, and with it, she took back her power. Life began anew. This time, stronger. The staff adjusted to Arya's new presence. No longer a maid, she became a quiet force in the house, warm, gracious, and respected. Guests who once turned their noses up were now met with a woman who carried herself with confidence. Ethan never let a day pass without showing her how much she meant to him. From small handwritten notes to spontaneous dances in the hallway, he reminded her, "You are loved. You are seen." Arya, in turn, made the mansion a home again. Laughter returned. Light returned. But the world wasn't done testing them. An anonymous letter arrived one morning, warning Ethan that if he didn't end things with Arya, his company would suffer. It wasn't just personal anymore, it was business. Enemies from the shadows were ready to strike. Ethan looked at the letter, then tore it to pieces. "Let them come," he muttered. "She's worth everything." Ethan's decision to ignore the threats didn't go unnoticed. Within days, media stories started resurfacing about his past business decisions, twisted, exaggerated, and clearly orchestrated to break him down. But Ethan stood firm. "If they want to destroy me for loving you," he told Arya, "then let them try." Arya felt torn. She couldn't let Ethan lose everything because of her. One night, she packed her bags again, leaving a letter behind. "This time, I'm not leaving because I'm weak. I'm leaving because I'm strong enough to protect you." But as she reached the gates, Ethan was already waiting there. "You walk out that gate again," he said, "and you'll never know what we could have survived together. Don't make me love you from a distance again." Arya's resolve crumbled as she ran into his arms. This time, they both knew, no more running. They'd face whatever came, side by side. To counter the smear campaign, Ethan held a simple interview, not in a suit, not in a boardroom, but on his garden bench with Arya by his side. "I fell in love with someone unexpected," he said. "Not because of what she owned, but because of who she is. And I'm proud of it." The internet split. Some called it a fairy tale, others called it a scandal. But for every hate comment, there were 2 more messages of support. Arya stayed off social media, but Ethan made sure she saw the ones that mattered, the ones that reminded her she wasn't alone. That night, they danced again. No cameras, no pressure, no guests. Just them and soft music in the hallway. As he spun her around, Ethan whispered, "We've walked through storms, and you still shine." She smiled and replied, "Because you stood with me through every drop." A few weeks later, Ethan hosted a small dinner for his closest friends and business partners. It was the first time Arya would be formally introduced as more than just someone he cared about. She was nervous, but Ethan squeezed her hand under the table. "You're not just part of my life," he said. "You are my life." The evening went surprisingly well. Even the toughest guests softened in Arya's presence. Her warmth, her grace, it wasn't something you could fake. "She's different," one partner told Ethan. "Not like the others. You might have found your forever." As they drove home that night, Arya looked out the window and said softly, "This doesn't feel like a borrowed life anymore. It feels like mine too." Ethan glanced at her, his heart full. "That's because it is, Arya." It always was. But peace never lasts long in a love story like theirs. Vanessa returned, this time not with bitterness, but with desperation. She'd been blacklisted from several agencies and accused Ethan of turning the world against her. She showed up at the estate again, this time with cameras. "Tell them the truth," she yelled at Ethan. "Tell them I was never just a fling." Ethan didn't flinch. "You were a chapter, Vanessa." "But Arya? She's my whole story." Arya came out calmly and walked up to Vanessa, looked her in the eyes and said, "Pain doesn't give you the right to destroy others." The video went viral, Arya's grace under pressure, Ethan's calm loyalty. Public opinion finally turned. Arya wasn't just a former maid. She was the woman who'd earned her place in a world that once looked down on her. And now, they admired her strength. Their love blossomed deeper. Ethan took her to his late mother's private retreat, a quiet house by the lake, where he hadn't been in years. "I never brought anyone here," he said. "But this place deserves someone like you." Arya walked through the rooms, feeling his past, his pain, his healing. By the fireplace, he took her hand. "I want to build a new life here. With you." Arya's heart pounded. "Are you asking me to move in?" He chuckled. "Not just move in. I'm asking you to build a future with me. A real one." They kissed under the stars that night, wrapped in blankets, hearts in sync. And for once, the world around them faded, leaving only love, laughter, and the crackle of a fire. Back at the mansion, Arya started decorating the guest quarters for her visiting aunt, the woman who had raised her after her mother passed. She was the first family member to meet Ethan. "He looks at you like you're the only woman in the world," her aunt whispered. Later that evening, her aunt pulled Ethan aside. "Don't let her give up too much of herself. She's strong, but she's still learning to believe it." Ethan nodded. "She's changed me more than I've changed her. I'll never let her lose herself." Arya overheard the conversation and felt tears gather in her eyes. Love wasn't just in gestures or kisses, it was in the quiet promises, the protection of who she was. And she knew now, she wasn't becoming someone new. She was simply becoming who she'd always been. As wedding whispers began floating around, Arya started to doubt again, not his love, but her readiness. "What if I fail as your wife?" she asked one night. "What if I don't fit into that picture?" Ethan looked at her seriously. "We'll paint a new picture. One that fits us both." Still, she took time for herself. Days alone, reading, journaling, working in the garden. Ethan supported her space without question. Love, after all, wasn't suffocation. It was freedom. And she needed to know who she was outside of labels, outside of fear. When she returned to the main house days later, she walked straight to Ethan and said, "I'm not afraid anymore. I'm ready for all of it, the ring, the vows, the forever." And Ethan, with tears in his eyes, replied, "Then let forever begin." The proposal wasn't grand, but it was perfect. On a rainy morning, Ethan took her to the garden he'd built for her. The petals were wet, the sky gray, but the love in his eyes was brighter than ever. "You came into my life dressed in simplicity," he said, kneeling. "And you turned it into something beautiful." Arya gasped as he held out the ring. A delicate, golden band with a single sapphire. "I don't want perfect. I just want you," she whispered. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." They embraced, soaked in rain, laughter mingling with the thunder above. Later that night, wrapped in each other's arms, Arya whispered, "Remember the first time you saw me dressing? You walked in and everything changed." Ethan smiled. That moment was fate. This is forever. Wedding preparations began, not with glitz or glamour, but with love. The guest list was small, just those who mattered. The dress Arya chose was simple and flowing. No diamonds, no drama, just elegance and honesty. On the day of the ceremony, Ethan waited by the lake where they'd once promised to build a future. Arya walked toward him, veil floating in the wind, every step echoing everything they'd overcome. The maid who once cleaned his floors now walked into his arms as his bride. Their vows weren't written on paper. They came from the heart. "I loved you when you were unsure," Ethan said. "And I'll love you even when we're old and gray." Arya smiled through her tears. "You gave me a home not just in your house, but in your heart. I vow to never leave it." The sun set behind them as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife. No audience cheers, just the soft rustling of leaves and the sound of their souls aligning. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a victory over judgment, over fear, over the past. They danced that night under fairy lights strung across the garden. Guests laughed, tears were shed, and joy filled the air. Arya held Ethan close and whispered, "I'm glad you walked in on me that day." He chuckled. "Best accidental entrance of my life." And as the night faded and morning crept in, the mansion no longer echoed with silence, but with music, with laughter, and with love, the kind born in unexpected places, grown through fire, and sealed in forever.